Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you so much, Miggy and Anna, for the great hype for my slides. Hopefully, they live up to it. So before we get into today's talk, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. So my name is Linda. I was born and raised in Senegal in a Lebanese Senegalese family, and I grew up listening to Afro-Cuban salsa, zouk from Cape Verde and the French Caribbean, Lebanese Egyptian classic, French hip hop, ndombolo, mbala music, all kinds of music. And the reason why I bring this up is because music was my first teacher of visual culture and aesthetics. So I spent a lot of time watching music videos and browsing album art in my family's connection. Growing up, my grandmother ran a grocery store and my grandfather owned an open air cinema. So, as with every other kid in honestly my community, I spent a lot of time with them. So, product labels, movie posters also shaped my understanding of image making and typography. And my family was super aesthetic and super artistic and stylish. But growing up, I resented sort of this visual noise, which I considered to be non-modern. Our walls was like were always covered in doodles and paintings, and every room had like different kinds of tiles, and our house was generally cluttered with all kinds of stuff. So when I started my career in design, I tried to distance myself from my upbringing because I needed to reformat my taste. I wanted to respect grids, to revere the monochrome, and to be really modern, exclusively modern. And I think that kind of landed me pretty good jobs, but it's not until I took a leave of absence from work as lockdown started that I realized how much damage it had actually done to my creativity. So when people ask me, why should we try to make design more inclusive and diverse? There are a few possible answers, but the one that's dearest to my heart is every community around the world has practiced and has developed a philosophy about design. But today, only designers trained in the Western canon get to call themselves designers. This is because, unsurprisingly, the standards by which we measure good and beautiful design have been whitewashed and pretty effectively so. So whether you went to design school or you're a self-taught designer, how you learn about design and what you learned design to be is actually one perspective of an infinitely larger practice and discourse. Um, so it's crazy to me is that it took me years to figure this out and a mental health breakdown to realize how this was affecting me. As a Black woman who designs and who didn't grow up in the West, I've had to significantly reformat my taste to make it in this industry. And in order to fit into this space that wasn't made to accommodate me, I've had to learn to make myself small and to spend my energy learning, how to speak in this world, how to be in this world. And I became proficient in its ways. And my objective really was not to stick out, was to signal that I was grateful to be here, and I didn't want to get kicked out. So it's kind of an exhausting and steady process of internalized erasure, because the more you blend in, the faster your artistic sensibilities start to wane, the more elusive your intuitions become, until you can barely feel what your internal compass is telling you. And this is kind of it's a soft, it's a silent, but it's a very certain kind of violence. So since last year, there's been a kind of a collective awakening to the systems like design that are intentionally designed to tell a singular story of the world, inevitably excluding all the other stories, rendering them meaningless in effect. And we want to create these new systems in institution and spaces, and basically found them on multiplicity and not in reverence to a singular kind of truth of what beautiful and good should mean, right? So to do this, we need new kinds of principles of what design's place in the world should be, beyond being an instrument to enact white modernist utopias. So I'm a small cog in a very large machine, but my part in trying to get this machine to work differently concerns how us as designers, as individuals, we can start to broaden our creative practice to include more diverse voices, starting from our own inner and authentic voice, as well as the voices of those we seek to serve. The design industry definitely needs to figure out a way to recruit and nurture more diverse talent because that's a precursor to change. But for the few of us who are already here, and for the future generation of designers of color, I'm interested in how we protect ourselves from whitewashing, and also grow aware of the parts of us that have already been whitewashed, so we can bring in and imprint our voice and the voices of our communities into what design means. So in the next few minutes, we'll explore together concrete ways in which you can start in your own design practice to adopt attitudes and a process that are more equitable and inclusive. Because this kind of work starts with you, we'll take a look at tangible steps you can take to liberate yourself from hegemonies, so through liberation. That's the first chapter. The second one would typically be expansion, but because of the length of this talk, we're only going to address liberation and emancipation, and expansion will be released at a later date. The methods I will be presenting today are meant to build into a lifelong practice of putting your influences into question, refining your sources of truth, and creating experiences that are more reflective of you as a person, and at scale of humanity's complexities. So hopefully it breathes new life into what it means for you to be a designer. So the first chapter of this toolkit is called liberation. And liberation means something else to each of us. So we're not going to discuss what it looks like. What we'll do instead is look at ways in which you can start the process. So what central questions you can explore for yourself in your own time to start to inform what it means for you to be liberated and to feel creatively free. It's crucial to start here because until you're able to articulate your perspective and recognize the space you occupy in the world, it's going to be difficult to relate to your users authentically and fairly. So first, we'll take a walk down memory lane and pay homage to our heritage. Then we'll name and take power away from our masters. And lastly, we'll see ways to recognize what our current imprint on the world is and how we'd like it to be moving forward. So let's talk about heritage for a second. In some West African cosmologies, there's a belief that it's impossible to move forward without a strong understanding of the past. It exists in many cosmologies as well. But for many of us, the past is kind of just that, right? It's gone, forgotten. And for some of us, it's also erased. And we've been socialized to be more concerned with racing toward the future and more improved versions of ourselves. And we treat history as a society with very loose integrity. But when we do this, we fail to recognize the impact the past has on us and how we can shape us and continue to speak through us and enrich our practice. So what we consider good is informed by what we grew up believing to be good. So from an individual standpoint, if we want to change, if we seek to grow, the more time we spend understanding ourselves and what has shaped us, the more equipped we are to grow. From a societal standpoint, though, many of us don't have the same rights to access our past because it's been systematically erased for generations. So part of the colonial project was to vilify and get rid of indigenous histories in order to make the process of assimilation to Western ideals easier, which meant that with each generation, more history was lost and communities under colonial rule grew further apart from their heritage. Today, as descendants of people who were made colonial subjects, we have to start to look at our heritage for what it is, endangered. If we don't do the work to learn about and bring our ancestral design philosophies and practices into how we design today, and if we don't expand what design means to incorporate the immeasurable beauty and complexity of our heritage, it will be lost forever. One way to do this, and it's not the only way, these are just kind of thought starters, you feel free to riff on them, improvise, change them, and share it with the community. One way to do this is what I call memory mood boarding. So I have terrible memory. It's very difficult for me to remember my past, and it takes me sometimes like weeks to remember something from my childhood. But I realized through the exercise that I've moved through life without actively noticing what was going on around me. So this tool helped me to do two important things for me as a designer. First, it helped me collect the library of influences that have shaped me creatively and artistically. Second, it taught me to notice better and helped me to be more mindful of what inspires me and influences me on the day-to-day. So how does it work in practice? It's just like a regular mood board, but for this exercise, you set yourself a timer for 60 minutes. And the images you source are not necessarily kind of Pinterest images. They're images from your past, sounds from your past, textures. So family albums, art where you grew up around, comic books, old family picture books, etc. And you can think about it this way. If someone was making a movie about your origin story and asked you to give them visual cues to recreate the aesthetic of where you grew up, what collection of images and sounds would you give them, and what stories would you tell them? So for example, I got these two album covers from the first slide I shared with you. So I grew up around this community called Baifal, and it's a community of Sufi Muslim ascetic monks. Shout out to everyone who's fasting. BIFAL basically create everything they wear and use from their community's waste. And the result is of striking beauty. It's I have yet to see monks that are more stylish than this. Their influence on popular culture in Senegal is far-reaching, and you can clearly see sort of through the timeline how they've influenced a designer that I like called Sely Rabikan, and her stuff is worn by Beyonce. So you can see how something that is hyper localized can have consequences far beyond the place it's from, but it's important to bring it to life. And from the mood board, you can use it, and you can use it as a source of like design briefs. You can recreate what you like from intuitions. You can try and codify the patterns to create a design system for your next project. And you can improvise and riff on the aesthetics that you like. For designers from marginalized backgrounds like myself, this process is not just useful, it's healing. It helped me create a more positive relationship with my past and made me appreciate the beauty of where I grew up. So in the community file, there will be an actual activity guide for how to do this with templates that you can adapt. Now let's talk about our masters and who they are and why it's important to name them. I choose the controversial word masters for a reason, because there are things and people that shape the way we work and shape the way we are. And some of these people or things we choose, some of them we don't. Some of them have been assimilated and internalized as true, but in fact don't have to be, really. So it's about really knowing who these masters are in order to be able to challenge them. So whoever your masters are, it's critical for you to know the influence they have on you, because sometimes what may seem like a very positive influence can actually be harmful to you. So this is where the master's phone book comes in. And it's basically a thought experiment which asks you first to name all your masters and place them on a scale from worship to respect. For example, under worship are those who intimidate you to either work really hard or not at all. They're so big and so good that in comparison, you feel small and insignificant. And under respect are those who inspire you to explore and challenge yourself. Their standards are aspirational, but not unattainable to you. They motivate you and make you feel like you count. Everyone else falls somewhere in between. And it also helps to ask yourself, who's missing from the list? For instance, like, are all your masters, do they all share a similar identity or context? Do they all have a similar viewpoint of the world? So this is, for example, what mine looks like. It's a short list of my masters. So my high school founders on one end, one of my high school founders on one end, and on the other hand, you have like my grandmother, my friend. And sometimes, it's people, sometimes it's movements like the neo-expressionist movement, something I truly revere, but sometimes have to be careful about how much it seeps through my work and how much of my voice come through in that. And you can do a couple things with this phone book. Basically, you can serve blocks to the influences that are negative to your creative practice. You can add to your contacts influences that are mostly positive, and especially if you need to be careful about how often and how you relate to them. And then lastly, you can put on speed dial those who make you feel validated and have a healing effect on your practice. For me, for example, these tend to be Black women artists, writers, and designers like my mother or my friend Ofo. Now let's talk about imprints. The world we live in today is a direct manifestation of a specific group of people's imagination. It's not surprising, it's still crazy, that this group is not very large and mostly homogenous. So as a designer, you have the power to alter reality with what you make, with what you create. So it's important for you to recognize this power, no matter how small what you work on may seem in the grand scheme of the world. So what does this mean for us? Well, we first have to imagine what reality we want to create for ourselves and for future generations, which is where the futures prism comes in. And in this method, we first envision the world like 10, 100, 1,000 years down the line. What does it look like? What tenets is it shaped by? And we start with a specific reality on one end and project this reality to the future in many different ways so we can get a nuanced perspective of it. So let's see what it looks like. So this example is specific about gender. For example, in today's world, men and women aren't equal. In a utopian world, this means that there's no gender expressions at all. By contrast, in a dystopian world, the women's only role in society is maybe to like have children and take care of other men. But if the world stays the same, uninterrupted, it may be that gender is still a binary system which determines who has power and who does not. Something I personally like to think is somewhere between uninterrupted and utopian, where gender is celebrated as an evolving spectrum which has no incidence or rights and access to resources. So that's kind of the future I want specific to gender, right? And the objective of this activity is actually not to be objective. And that's the beauty of it, right? We can only imagine the future based on what we value, what we hope for, and what we're afraid of. So really, this tool helps you create your personal manifesto for your creative practice. How do you want to bring to life the future you imagine? And it might take you a while to articulate or to get to an articulation that you feel good about, but it helps to use narrative loops, for instance, which is an action for this future prism. So basically, you can try going back and forth in the prism. So start from reality and then in future, or start from future, go back through reality, and working back and forth to identify what are some things that are common, what are some patterns that are emerging in what you value versus what you don't. Okay, so now that we've discussed the ways in which we can work on ourselves, let's talk about what it means for how we relate to users. The first thing to note here is that when we use the word users to refer to people who might use our product, we sometimes forget that they're whole beings with contexts and concerns that extend far beyond what we create for them. On the flip side, though, what we put into their hands can impact their lives deeply. Ideally, to an extent, we as designers, them as users can anticipate, but the truth is, it's really hard to do that. For example, who could have predicted the extent the like button would have had on our psyche and brain chemistry? But that's not an excuse. So the next set of methods relate to emancipatory design and how we can bring users into our process in a much more intentional way in order to assess impact of our designs, but also try to minimize harm. So we're all familiar with echo chambers, and many social networks actually thrive on this. An echo chamber is basically something that isolates you within a belief system and reverberates only what you currently hold to be true. Whether it's actually true or factual, doesn't matter. By contrast, an anechoic chamber allows you to listen beyond your belief system and hear other sources of truth, which you may or may not agree with. This is important because many user research practices tend to be woefully validatory. So it happens at three levels. The first one is who we design for. The second is who we target for research. And finally, in the tools we actually use to conduct research. So let's think about who we design for. In some cases, we build archetypes of people who might use our products. The truth is, what we identify is really who we believe might use our product. And as soon as you phrase it that way, it makes sense how many biases might come into play. The biases can be racial, socioeconomic, class-based, dialectical, ability-related. We're basically creatures who are very good at saying what we already know and not thinking very far beyond ourselves. So as you're building archetypes, you have to push yourself away from the sort of homogeneous thinking by considering different dimensions. And this is where the archetypal randomizer comes in. So first, you articulate the goal of your design. For example, like I need to build a process to deliver product plans or whatever it is. And you play this game, which is basically allows you to randomize different archetypes of your users potentially. So you could do this by like rolling a dice, like you would do in Dungeons and Dragons, to pick your character's abilities. And the idea is to generate many different archetypes. So this is kind of an archetype builder. So the goal here is volume. So you can come up with as many dimensions as you want in addition to the one that already exists. But the more archetypes profiles you generate, the more diverse your view of who might use your product can become, and it enriches your process. But it also is a nice way to check your designs against some of these archetypes, which you may not have thought about naturally. So with a more diverse set of users you can design for, you want to invest in actually finding them where they are. And this happens sometimes in like how we recruit for research, right? So when we recruit for research, we have to ask ourselves, where am I finding and reaching out to people? Because the sources of research participants can inform you on how homogeneous your participant pool will be. For example, if you only recruit through you and your colleagues' social networks, which are echo chambers, you're most likely to recruit people who look, think, and behave like you. So if your design team doesn't represent a diverse array of perspectives, and knowing the statistics in the design world, we know that it doesn't for the most part, there's no evidence that your social networks will. So you have to ask yourself, where can my users be found, especially those that don't look like me, that don't behave like me, and how do I reach out to them where they are? Because they're not going to come and find you, that's for sure. So let's turn to how we learn from our users. And typically we'll do interviews and surveys. These methods are fine, but they're also deeply, deeply limited. So first, they're language-based and only rely on what someone says, rarely giving us space to understand how it was said and why it was said. Second, they're actually more reflective of what we ask rather than what we need to find. So this is where distributed design comes in. The idea behind it is to share power evenly in your process between your team and your users. That means moving away from extractive methods to co-creative methods. A simple way to think about this is going from asking people to tell you what they might want or need to giving them tangible tools to show you what they actually want or need. In another way, instead of building for people, building with them. Another tenet of distributed design is that research doesn't stop at the ideation stage of your product, and that it's actually woven through the entire process from ideation to launch. So one way you can do this is through a method I call the world builder. It's a tangible tool that your users have complete control over. So for example, a Figma space, or now we know it could be a FigJam space. It can be physical or digital, but it has to be multi-sensory. And you need to build it such that users can go into it whenever they want, for however long they want, and without you being there. So it has 3 dimensions: people, places, and things. In places, people can draw photos, videos, audio clips, write-ups describing their context as it relates to your design brief. You don't have to tell them what you want to know. They tell you what they think you should know, and you can follow up with more information. And this flips the basic idea of an interview on its head, which basically asks them about what they think you should know. In the people dimension, they get to tell you about themselves, who they are from a deeper point of view. So they decide how much information they want to share with you and how intimate they want the space to get, not the other way around. And in things, you get to give them the tools to build something. So to help with this, you can share, for example, like features you're thinking about, or even inspiration screenshots. This space can be very lo-fi and scrappy. And you can even add like stuff that's inspiring you. And the idea is that you dump it with a bunch of volume in there, some collagey stuff, some interesting things, and give them the task basically to create something that demonstrates what they would want you to create for them. It can be very abstract. From what I've seen, some people get really abstract, some people get really tangible, but either way, it's such a great way to get at what they really need, as opposed to having to go through this gruesome process of validating your own hypothesis. So as your design process evolves, so does the world builder. And you can continue to drop anything you create or update into the tool to give the users you're working with the chance to react to it and to give you feedback. Now, for something like the world builder to work in practice, we have to reframe what consent means in the design process. When someone agrees to participate in research, they will know just how much you tell them about what you need to find out. And if this changes later down the line, they have a very difficult time, A, finding out, B, having an opportunity to challenge you on it. So consent needs to basically look different if we want design to be more diverse and more equitable. First, instead of recruiting users for an interview, we're actually building a group to co-create and co-design with, meaning that they will be involved with us from conception to delivery. And there are some principles I use to help me guide me through those, and these are some of the 5. And basically, the idea here is that with a more intentional approach to research and consent, which takes a little longer to be fair, we build products that are actually built with people and not for them, and that makes them much more likely to succeed and less likely to harm. It's also a far more fun process. So for example, some of these principles, our users consent to what we're certain about and what is subject to change. And we don't just tell them what we know, we also tell them what we might not know and find out later. Our users only consent when it feels right. And if it doesn't, their information is there. So it's kind of a rolling consent, right? So they can decide, you know what, I'm no longer comfortable with this. I'm going to take my stuff back. Our users will always have a way to reach us with question concerns or to reevaluate their agreements. This sometimes, I don't know how many projects you've done where you interviewed someone and I've never ever seen them again or heard from them again, and they probably might not know what the interview did for you or helped you with. But this basically creates a kind of communication loop where you're consistently sharing maybe updates with them if you'd like, but they're also able to challenge you. And the fourth one, our users are aware of their compensation and how it was determined, how it compares to other users within the scope of the research, and they're invited to negotiate it. Information is different to each of us. Some of us don't necessarily, we don't all value our information in the same way, and we should be able to negotiate the terms of how that information is used and what that means for us. And then the last one is we share with our users progress updates about our designs and how they're evolving, and give them a chance to engage with us on it. And this is really about building a community, the same way Figma has an incredible community with the people who use the products and who enjoy it, and basically enrich the process of how the product is created. All right, so that's it for me. This is part 1 and part 2 of the Even by Design toolkit, Liberation and Emancipation. And the first part, Liberation, is already available as a community file, which you can grab after this talk. Every month I'll be updating the file with the next chapter. So you can look forward to Emancipation next and Expansion last. And I look forward to engaging with you all there or on social media. If you want to kind of stay in touch with my work, my thoughts, you can sign up for my newsletter, or you can follow me on Twitter. I'm very quiet on social media, but every once in a while I might post something, a tool or something useful or something I'm thinking about. Thank you.